Thank you for joining us today. We have Rajesh Uttamchandani with us, and he's a Managing Director and CPO, Chief People Officer at Zafin. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we look forward to asking you a lot of questions relevant to kind of our audience for scale-up companies, anywhere between 30 to 80 people. So the topic we'll talk about today would be largely around HR and talent strategies. But before we dive in, maybe you can walk us through how you got here. Why do you think there was a need for a Chief People Officer? Because that role hasn't been created at Zafin before you joined.
Right.
And what kind of impact has it been since you started that role?
Sure, that sounds good. So I've had a long career in HR, primarily at large companies, and I ran HR, later in my career for companies like CIBC Mellon, Gap Inc. Canada, and for the wholesale bank at CIBC. And after I did that, I really, for me, wanted to go back and get back to the basics about learning and strategy and talent programs. So I went to the Deloitte Human Capital practice for about 4.5 years, learned a lot of stuff. And when I was ready to go back and run HR, I was looking for a company that was about to go through hypergrowth, and I was looking for something global, and I was looking for something that I could be part of a bigger story. And I think Zafin was at the stage, it's been around for about 11 or 12 years by then, had grown to a few hundred people, but it was struggling to get past the inflection point that it was at. And so I think the CEO had the foresight to know that he needed some help in the people area. And so I think he was looking for a traditional HR person, more at the director level. And as he went through his search process, we met each other. And I think we both, first of all, we just connected really well. And he kind of could see the value I'd bring, not just for today, but for 5 years down the road when his company was much bigger. And I think that's why he brought me on. So when I got to Zafin, it had a few very limited people programs, or generally administrative and basic. And so since I've come there, we've done a bunch of things, but a few highlights I'll give you. We put in a performance management program that's all digital, takes a few minutes, but people need to do it monthly. We did that so that people would be having the right conversations all the time, not just once a year. We have a very geographically dispersed workforce, so we're in a bunch of countries around the world. So for me to be in touch with my employees, we do a weekly survey with a software called Waggle. So we just ask 5 questions. A couple of them are the same every week, and a few of them are different every week. And kind of, in addition to getting information back from our employees, it really helps us to get communication out and tell our employees what's going on, what's happening, in a very short, concise way, where they feel like they're part of the story too, because they have input back. Those are 2 things we've done. In addition to all the normal HR stuff, like we reorganized the company. When I got there, the founder had 27 direct reports, which I think is typical for a founder. He now has 7, and maybe in the future it'll go down by 1 or 2. And we've reorged the company and restructured it in the right way so that we can execute on our strategy. I think a lot of companies, when they go through the reorganization process, they use the models. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but they're 8x8, 7x7. They're coined by consulting companies. But when I think about technology and the way technology needs to be organized, you can't organize it the way you would organize a bank. You need to organize it for not just for efficiency, but more for agility and the ability to move quickly. So that requires a different organizational structure, depending on the business you're in. So we've done things like that as well.
Thank you for that. So you mentioned that you were pretty much brought in to break through that chasm of almost scalability of the organization. And one challenge that a lot of companies or a lot of this audience for this show is struggling with is breaking through that almost a startup barrier where they have maybe 15, they have 20 people. It's really easy. For them to get to 100 people, they will have to go through a completely different set of challenges. One of them is recruiting people fast. And having talked to many companies before, and even speaking on our experience, I see that in the past, when we were a small company, it was almost easier to recruit because you present to people an opportunity to be really early on. You have an opportunity to wear multiple hats. The scope of responsibility is really large. Whereas with large companies, I almost feel it's easier for them to recruit as well because they have, first of all, resources to actually compete from compensation standpoint, and they also have a brand name.
Yeah.
So for these smaller or scale-up companies, where do you think they can win in the recruitment game?
So I think in the recruitment game, for me, where they win, and the reason I went to a smaller company, so I hope this isn't too personal, but I think when you go to a large company, you might be part of a bigger brand, you might have a little cachet because of that. But when you think about the actual direct impact you're having, it's so diluted through so many layers and through so much hierarchy that if you're motivated by impact and getting things done, you don't feel it in a larger company. I think a smaller company, you have direct impact and you're really part of a story. And I think to me that's where smaller companies can thrive. On the branding part, it's a little different because it's hard to get your brand out there when you're not a big name brand. But I think with social media and I think with the newer generation of people coming out of school, I think you can have a targeted program where you focus on a few schools, you use social media as a great platform, and you can get your brand out there. I don't think that's as much of a liability as it might have been in the past.
So for kind of branding or one of the strategies that companies of larger size employ, they push for the company mission and purpose to really motivate people to join them. So whereas for smaller companies, you could just attract people with just the opportunity to work on many different projects and kind of ambiguity attracts people. With larger companies, you almost have to align everybody around some bigger vision. At which point do you think companies should really position themselves around purpose versus just getting things done and trying to get their product out of the way?
I think it's a hard balance. I hope I answered your question. But I think once you start getting past 25 or 30 people, you need to start looking for people not to just get things done, but to get people that have already done what you need done. I think there's an inherent inefficiency in having people learn how to do things as you ask them to do it. And I think once you have 25 or 30 people and maybe a certain revenue number, you should try and get people that have been there, done that. So you save, it's much more efficient.
So for these companies, many of their leaders are actually from millennial generation. So what is your perspective on recruiting people that have been there, done that, but also for them to actually follow the leadership of a younger leader?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and obviously a balance you have to strike. But I think it's a worthwhile thing, at least for some key positions within the company. So I don't mean you got to hire each and every employee like that, but maybe you're trying to do something, you have a special initiative. So maybe in a few critical roles, you hire people that have been there, done that, because that also is a higher cost, right? And so maybe for the execution under those, you can hire more millennials. So I think it's possible. I think there's a lot of psychometrics and stuff, as you know, when recruiting now too. So I think if you are hiring someone who's very different from your normal population, it's worthwhile investing in some psychometrics just to see how they profile and how they profile against your other employees as well, to see if they will be able to fit and last and work in your culture.
Mm-hmm. So for roles that almost didn't exist, say 5 years ago, and some of the people that were put into leadership roles where they don't necessarily have experience in, what would your suggestion be for these people to go out and seek? How would they develop themselves as a leader? Should that come from a company? Should they just take initiative on their own for development?
So you're talking about leadership attributes?
Yeah.
So I think there's lots of training out there. There's lots of stuff you can read, but I really think a lot of leadership comes from actually having to do it. So you can do that in many different ways. It can be in a company, it can be outside a company, even in volunteer things. So I think I would look at the world around me and try and put my hand up for as many leadership opportunities as I could, regardless of if they're at work or personal. Because I think the beginning of leadership is bumpy and you never do a great job in your first leadership role, right? It's always a learning. And I don't think you ever finish learning how to be a leader because it's such an art.
So in 2017 at least, being an entrepreneur or being a part of a startup is very almost trendy. How do you view, if you are looking to hire a person who've tried starting companies in the past, what is your view of these people? Do you think, do you expect them to bail at some point as soon as they have something going? Or do you view it more as a person who can grow into become a really great entrepreneur?
I think obviously that's a case-by-case situation, and I would assess each person separately. But I think there's a lot of core skills, like someone like yourself who's started their own company a few times learns, that can be spectacular in a larger company. And when I look at all the large companies out there, like the big banks, the insurance companies, they're all really trying to get that entrepreneurship in their culture, and they're going so far as to take groups of people, put them off site, put them at Mars, places like Mars, put them in workspaces like this, just to get them out of the bureaucracy and let that creativity and innovation flourish in them. So I think people who come from the world where they live and breathe that every day, I think they can be of huge benefit to companies, in my opinion.
Yeah. What about actually, so you mentioned taking actually teams outside of their core workspace or outside of their normal kind of atmosphere. How do you actually keep, and that actually applies to smaller departments within an organization. How do you engage smaller teams that are not part of kind of the core large teams within a company? So for example, a tech startup can have a really large revenue team, really large tech team, and then there's a bunch of small support teams that are not necessarily part of the larger team, but how do you keep them involved? How do you keep them engaged so they feel really like they're part of the team?
Yeah, so I think your question is like, if they're not the real talent of the business, how do you make them feel part of the bigger picture and part of the story? And for me, that's always been around understanding vision, goals, and understanding how, I'm the people person where I am at, so it's not a direct relation to the dollars, right? But it's really important that I understand how what I do every single day actually flows through to the bottom line, actually flows through to our clients. And so when I understand that, it makes me part of the story, right? And I think it's up to leadership too to make sure that people don't feel like there's talent and there's not talent, that it's one big machine, and if one piece of it isn't working well, the whole thing doesn't work well, regardless of who might be generating the revenue or creating the product. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So going back to recruitment or hiring, inevitably there will be people that join the company that are not necessarily a good fit. What do you think is an acceptable churn rate, or how do you view the churn? And let's start with that question.
Yeah, so there's been research, so before, when I started working, retention was like the number people looked at. And lately, the research has been showing that retention might not be a good thing because, it might actually mean you have stale talent and people that aren't creative and innovative and all that kind of stuff. So when I think about things like that, and I think about, the tech workforce and technology and how quick it's moving, I actually think, I don't know what the right number is, but I think having churn, a lot of churn isn't bad if you are trying to always be creative and innovative. I think you need some core people there just to keep the business running. But I think as a small company goes through the many different stages to become a bigger company, you need different people along the way and different people for that piece of the path. And so I don't think churn is bad if you understand that and bring the right people when you need them.
That's a great perspective. And then, I'm not sure if Zafin is dealing with this, but I know a number of companies in our network dealing with this. When as they're scaling, inevitably you're bound to bring people in that potentially not a good fit, and some of the negative feedback can get onto Glassdoor, and how do you address negative feedback from past employees, for example, in a way that doesn't limit you from bringing on great talent in the future?
Well, first thing is I'd hope, just like when, my wife looks at TripAdvisor, that we look at it with a little bit of, it's a data point, it's not the data point. I will say with TripAdvisor, for example, like people write when they're super, super happy or super, super mad, right? Not much in the middle. So I think it's the same with Glassdoor and other mediums like that. So I think it should be a data point for people, not everything. And I think the biggest thing to do with employees, if they ask questions related to it, is to be as transparent, as honest as you can. I think as you go through the recruiting process, you really, I think the mismatch happens when the expectations on either side are not met. So you have expectations of the employee, they don't meet them, or the employee has expectations of you as a company and you don't meet them. So the more you can talk, the more you can be open, honest, transparent, the better everything's laid out on the table for everyone. And hopefully the expectations are aligned as best as possible. But when they aren't, you need to be assertive about moving people out. I think there's passive, assertive, aggressive. Never be passive about talent, never be aggressive, but you must be assertive. And I find a lot of companies have trouble doing that when people aren't working out, or they let it go on too long. And just to add to that, I think what companies need to understand is if you have a person who's not happy, the cost is not just the fact they might not be producing. They cause a lot of disruption and change and issues around them as well. So it costs you a lot more than the direct cost you think that they cost you.
Yeah. So oftentimes, potentially there's somebody on the bottom level of the employee or organizational hierarchy where it's not really working out, but as they say, the boss is the last person to hear about this, somebody underperforming or potentially having bad attitude. How do you facilitate the flow of this information from bottom up without making everybody feel like they're snitching on each other?
Well, I think you gotta create a culture where, especially in a small company, where everyone's a leader in the company. And even if I'm the second lowest level in the company and someone under me is not producing, like when you're a company, I think you said your company, you're about 77 people, that's a big deal, right? Like if 3 or 4 people aren't producing, that's like, 7% of your company. And people need to understand the impact of that, and they need to feel like they can talk about it. Because often I find when a person's not doing well, it's not good for them, it's not a good fit for them, it's not a good fit for the company, it's better for everyone to move on. So I think the answer to your question is you gotta make it okay for people to talk about how people are doing at all levels, and everyone in your company should feel like an owner, everyone in your company should feel like a leader, and they should not tolerate that.
We're 55 people, it's slightly smaller than that, but I can definitely agree with you there. I would love if everybody really took ownership of their roles, and some people do an amazing job at that. But are there any tactical strategies where you can, except telling openly, you should be an owner, you should be a leader, are there some strategies to kind of build this culture of leadership?
So I think, I don't think there's a science to it, but I think people need to feel like they have the autonomy to make decisions without getting second guessed. I think people need to feel like they can take risks without getting slapped on the wrist, even if they fail. And so I think you need to think about things like that weaved into your culture. A lot of companies, around the size of yours or bigger or smaller, but startups, the founders are so deeply involved from top to bottom, as they should be in growing their business, that people actually, just at a certain point, if a lot of decisions are taken away from them, they abdicate responsibility to the leadership. And so you got to be aware if you're doing that or not doing that, because if people don't think they can make mistakes and don't think they have a voice, then they'll never do it. So I didn't answer your question with tactics, but I think it's a very palatable cultural feel that you put in your company that you'd know right away if your people would make that call or not.
That definitely resonated with me, so yeah. Something for us to take away for sure. How do you check for internal alignment? How do you know if this leadership culture has actually propagated through the entire organization? You mentioned a feedback tool where you ask questions. Are there any other mechanisms that you have in place for checking alignment?
So in a company of your size or slightly bigger, I mean, I would, if I was trying to create alignment, first of all, I would, the vision, goals, purpose of the company, I'd make sure it's cascaded all the way down. And by that I mean, like, if you have your goals, the people that report to you have their goals, but they all connect and line up with your goals, and so on, right to the bottom of the company. But if you have 55 people, the leadership, the founders, part of their role, in my view, should be, I would be having, meetings with my employees weekly with different groups and having a conversation that is just always happening. Because that's the only way you can continually tweak and nudge people in the right direction, right? So in the absence of information, people make their own story. So the more you can talk to them about the story, the better.
Makes sense. So now we'll probably start wrapping up our conversation. So I have a couple closing questions for you. So what do you think more founders should do when it comes to culture?
I think founders have to be aware of their power. And so what I mean by that is when you're in a company where you're the founder, you have a lot of power. What you say to people and what you don't say to people is very important. And so you shouldn't take that lightly. I think that's like a big responsibility. I also think that founders, the few that I know, right, and the few that I've worked with, are deeply involved from start to finish of everything, which is part of what makes them successful. But I think in order to scale, you have to start letting stuff go. And when you let stuff go, it'll never be 100% the way you would do it. It might be 70, it might be 80, but you have to be able to do that and let it go. Because without that, you're going to be stuck in the weeds of the company instead of taking the company, to the vision that you really want to get it to.
Raj, I couldn't have asked for any better insight. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Great chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.